most likely to retrieve a forgotten name. Our agreed intent, then, is to produce an album of remembrance, a collection of small memoirs meant to stand out from the welter of the past. 7 chapters of, if I may borrow an old catchphrase, emotion recollected in tranquility. When completed, it is to be placed in the Academy vault at J.P. Morgan & Company, together with the history and other mementos already deposited therein, including the invaluable portrait of Henry James that once adorned the chapel. It has always been a matter of pride for us that the Academy's physical plant was constructed on what had been the property, a goodly acreage, of the Temple family, cousins to Henry James. It was from these reputable temples that the Academy gleaned its name. Unhappily, as recorded in the history, this circumstance has led to misunderstanding. That we were on occasion taken for a Mormon edifice, though risible, was difficulty enough. Most unfortunate was the too common suspicion that temple signified something unpleasantly synagogical, so that on many a Sunday morning the chapel's windows, those precious panels of stained glass depicting the Jerusalem of Jesus' time, were discovered to have been smashed overnight. The youngest forms were regularly enlisted to sweep up the shards and stones. How ironic were these ugly events, given that the Academy's spirit was premised on English religious and scholarly principles. Our teachers, vetted for probity and suitable church affiliation, were styled masters. Our pupils wore blazers embroidered with inspirational insignia and caps to match. Football, on the British model, was hygienically encouraged. French, Latin, attendance at chapel, and horsemanship were all mandatory, and indeed our earliest headmaster was brought over at a considerable wage from Liverpool, and all that in the familiar greenery of Westchester County. Yet I have thus far engaged in this overly hasty prologue without having spoken of my own lineage. I am, as stated above, a Petrie. We have had among us men distinguished in jurisprudence, and I retain in their original folders a selection of my grandfather's briefs, uncommonly impressive in that old copperplate hand, together with early letterheads, on fine linen paper of the family firm founded by his father. My own father in his youth left the firm briefly to pursue other interests, but was persuaded to return, and I have in my possession a sampling of his estimable contractual instruments, as well as a small private notebook crackling with grains of sand trapped in its worn and brittle spine. Of this more anon. I am told that I have myself a certain prowess in the writing of prose, at least in the idiom appropriate to the law. And while these bloodline emblems of civic dedication hold pride of place in my heart, they do not reach the stratum of distinction, let alone of renown, of yet another Petrie. Here I speak of William Matthew Flinders Petrie, knighted by the Queen, and more broadly known as the illustrious archaeologist Sir Flinders Petrie, who passed away in his home in a turbulent Jerusalem a scant 7 years ago, and is partially interred in the Protestant cemetery on Mount Zion. I am obliged to say partially. His head he donated to the Royal College of Surgeons in London. My father, in addition to his nearly lifelong devotion to the law, though that life was too brief, was enamored of ancient times, and of esoteric maps, and also of genealogy, and thereby successfully traced the degrees of our relationship to this extraordinary man. It is difficult, of course, to judge when a cousin of a certain distance becomes rather more of a stranger than a relation, but in my father's view there were reasons for his feelings of closeness. I have intimated that my father impulsively broke away from the firm, to the shock of his parents, and more particularly the consternation of his young wife. Among his papers I have found a Browning newspaper clipping of this event, distressingly reported as a scandal. He did, in fact, disappear in the blazingly hot summer of 1880, having gone in search of Cousin William, not yet Sir Flinders. At that time the press was infatuated with the spectacular excavations in Egypt, particularly the Great Pyramid of Giza, under the supervision of Cousin William, who was then a youthful prodigy of 28. My young father